This time we explore Jono's sketch that sets out the basic colour wheel that displays primary and secondary colours and the relationships between them.
It's very instinctive how I use colour, but I was interested to look at the colour wheel and see that my palette is strictly on one half of that wheel.
This is the basic colour wheel. This is one of the most sort of simple models of colour I remember learning, a long time ago. I really like the structure of it. In some ways, colour can just be like, pick what you like. But the colour wheel is interesting for me because it gives this order. And then there was also, as I learned from art teachers, like a bit of logic to where you might use this or that.
My wife, Lucia, is a big fan of your kind of colours. I always have a joke when we're sort of thinking about redecorating a room. So which version of blue-grey are we having in this room?
Hello and welcome to Sketchplanations, the podcast. For centuries, scholars have studied, hypothesised and argued where language comes from. However, in 1866, at their newly formed headquarters at 45 Rue des Écoles in the 5th arrondissement of central Paris, the Linguistic Society of Paris banned any existing or future debate on the origin of language, deeming it a topic unsuitable for serious study given the shortage of direct empirical evidence. But whilst the origins of language may be shrouded in uncertainty, today it's widely accepted by academics and otherwise that the conclusion of language is the podcast. Experts agree that it can be refined no more. That through regular, entertaining, episodic bites, the harmonious relationship between mouth and ear has been perfected. And who are we to argue? I'm Rob Bell, proponent of the Bow Wow theory, and joining me once again as we dance the figurative fandango of officiousness, it's Jono Hay and Tom Pellereau. Hello, my friends. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Paris there, I mentioned in the intro, and it's arrondissement.
What does that mean?
They're little districts within the centre of Paris that kind of breaks up the city administratively more than anything else. But what I kind of knew, but I reminded myself about this when confirming where the Linguistic Society of Paris actually is in the city itself. It's in the 5th arrondissement. And I reminded myself that the arrondissement of Paris, they're kind of structured in this like snail shell spiral, starting in the middle, and then it spirals clockwise outwards from 1 right round to number 20. And it does I think there are about 3 layers, three loops, if you see what I mean.
Very cool.
And then it started making me think about other cities, other towns' layouts that are of interest. There's the canal rings of Amsterdam. You guys both been to Amsterdam. There's kind of, again, concentric rings of canals there. There's a place in Italy called Palmanova. And now this is, what do you call it? I'm not sure if it's medieval or not, the village itself. But it's formed on top of a hill in a 9-pointed star shape, the walls, for military defence reasons.
I thought you were going to say that it's shaped like a pavlova.
That would be good. How would that...
sort of crumbling in on the outside.
How would that manifest
mess in the middle? Amazing.
And then I stumbled on Savannah in Georgia in America. So a city in the south, and it's, when you look at it, it's a block system, your traditional block system of a city, with avenues and streets. Is that right? But there are all these little square parks dotted all over in rows, and around each of those parks they had something called wards, and they were kind of split up administratively so that you'd have all the amenities that you need inside each ward, and you'd have this kind of public green space in the middle of them. It's worth checking out on Google Maps as well. Any knowledge of interesting town or city layouts that you boys have at all?
So Jono and I actually both lived in a city called Ypres in Belgium, which was kind of almost the epicenter of the First World War in some respects.
Yes.
Was known to many as Wipers because it rains a lot. And it got so badly bombed and destroyed in the war. The massive cathedral in the First World War, the massive cathedral in the center got completely smashed to the ground.
Yeah.
And it was decided by the higher beings that after the First World War, Wipers should be left as like a memorial to the First World War. And it was sort of agreed that they would not rebuild this cathedral. It would like be a kind of, a museum almost. And the local people were like, no, we want our cathedral back. So they rebuilt it sort of from the ashes, so to speak. And it does look like quite a mess. They then built a fantastic cenotaph just on the outside. And every single night, Jono, they still play the last post. Every single night they have 2 or 3 trumpeters who will play that incredible piece of music, and they have a little ceremony to kind of mark, to honour the literally millions of people that died nearby.
Wow. So what does the cathedral look like? Does it look like a newly or newer built cathedral?
It looks like it's been put together from smashed bits of stone.
It's a very cool place though, if you get a chance to go visit.
It's amazing.
It's lovely to sit out in the square there. It's interesting, that one came to mind. I was thinking of, it's not exactly a funny layout, but San Francisco is like stuck on this peninsula, and having lived there for a good number of years. Yeah, and it's so hilly. There's like the 7 hills of San Francisco or something, right? And yet the streets are more or less laid out as if there were no hills at all. And so it's just like somebody just came down and said, we're going to build a road due east-west. And it happens to go up the very side of this huge steep hill and then back down at this impossible angle. And we're just going to keep ploughing on regardless. And it's such a funny one, because in the UK, where the streets were so much older and just sort of evolved
the contours
a bit more naturally, they just they follow the contours. And then San Francisco's like, I'm having none of that. Literally, like, we're just going to draw a grid on the end of this peninsula and have it. And that's just why you get those impossible angles and crazy steep hills.
Well, yeah, it's iconic. Those, the car chases in the films down through the streets of San Francisco. Was
bash
it the Sony
down the slope, and then there's a straight flat road.
With sparks. There's loads of YouTube stuff of people doing it on skateboards and all sorts of mad stuff, or in wheelie bins. There was that. Was it Sony Bravia ad as well, when they dumped those like tens of thousands of coloured balls down the streets as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what comes when you completely ignore nature. Just go for it anyway. Really go for this. There's another one that reminds me. Again, it's not like a particularly exciting layout. It's just basically somebody's done a grid, but it struck me because it's on the edge of this something called the Salar de Uyuni in Bolivia, which is a giant. It's absolutely enormous salt flat. Incredible place to visit. And San Juan is this tiny little village on the edge of that, which is basically in desert. And it's desert and it's completely flat in all directions. And yet they've put like this grid. And so whichever point you stand, you can basically look north, south, east and west, and it just goes into nothing in every direction.
What, your perspective just goes off into
because
a point?
They've just got a grid in the middle of a flat plain. And so you look north and it goes off. There's 20 houses and then it's endless desert. You look south, 20 houses, endless desert, and same left and right. So it's a weird sort of place. It's like it just vanishes into the desert. It's cool. It's a cool place to be. It never happens in the UK, right? It's too bumpy, it's too hilly. There's always a curve, there's a bend, there's a little hill. It's just flat.
And most things have happened organically, all right? Although I was having this discussion recently about new towns in the UK, and Milton Keynes probably the most famous or the largest of new towns. Fact check. All roundabouts, right? So more the kind of block grid system that you find in more modern countries. So when you start from scratch, that kind of higgledy-piggledy bends and roads going all over the place, the random spaghetti type look maybe wasn't the most efficient, and the block system prevailed with hundreds and hundreds of roundabouts, which interestingly is where I learnt to drive.
Very good at roundabouts.
Very good.
It's funny though, isn't it? I always think like if you design a town from like first principles, it doesn't necessarily mean it's as good to live in. I always think like what's a fun town is like, I think of Italy or something where you have these little hilltop things and all the streets are higgledy-piggledy and they go in different directions and you keep finding little alleyways and there's steps up here and this one winds round and then you suddenly get a view. Like that's kind of more exciting than, I guess I can
definitely
get to
more
work
convincing
convenient
when you're on holiday. I don't know if it's like as handy if you live there and you just got to go.
Like, oh,
Gee.
let me get to work. Lost it again.
Well, before the advent of things like Google Maps or maps on your phone that you could carry around with you, it is quite easy. It's a lot easier to navigate in a grid system, right, than it is in an organically grown city or town.
I remember, obviously having grown up in the UK, streets are, quite short because they sort of are higgledy-piggledy. And when first went to Santiago in Chile, I was going to this place and it was sort of on this road. I was like, oh, cool, it's on this road. That road goes through the middle. Oh, that'll be easy. I didn't sort of clock the fact that it was like house number 5032. I was like, well, I was like at 1 or 2 and it was 4 or 5 miles down this road. I think I eventually got on a bus. I'm never going to get there otherwise.
Fell asleep, ended up at 10,000. Yeah. Well, listen, however your town is structured, here in Podsville, call us traditional, but we like a beginning, a middle and an end. That was the beginning. Let's delve into the middle. The meaty, cheesy, salady, finely seasoned flavour of this sandwich. Let's podcast. This time we explore Jono's sketch that sets out the basic colour wheel that displays primary and secondary colours and the relationships between them. Now, this topic was spurred on by an intro chat we had a few episodes back when I asked Jono and Tommy about their favourite colours, blue being the most popular favourite globally, as it turns out. And in that short chat about colour, Jono told us that, surprise, surprise, he'd done a sketch on the colour wheel, and we figured that'd be a great topic for a whole episode, so here we are. Now, Jono will probably be the first to say that there's way more to the science and the nuances of colour than presented in his sketch, but that's why the word basic is included in the title. So you should be able to see the basic colour wheel sketch as the artwork for this episode on your screens now. But if not, or if you fancy a closer look at it, I'll include a link to the sketch in the podcast description where you can see it in its full glory on sketchplanations.com. And I'll also link to any other interesting references we make in the discussion. As ever, we'll be going through the postbag of your correspondence with us at the end of the show. And if you'd like to get in touch with your thoughts and your stories about any of the topics that we cover on the podcast, you can send your emails to
hello@sketchplanations.com.
Thank you, Tommy. Or you can leave us a voice note by clicking the blue microphone button on the podcast website, sketchplanations.com/podcast. Right then. So this is the point where I usually ask Jono to describe the sketch and tell us why he wanted to include it in his collection. But first, there's more pressing matters at hand, because on this episode, I'm delighted to say that we're joined by artist and ceramist Lucia Fraser. Now, Lucia studied for her honours degree in fine art at the University of Newcastle upon Tyne. She's since exhibited her work in galleries right across the UK and has collaborated with iconic British design brands such as Hobbs and Heels Furniture. I'm also very pleased to say Lucia is a friend of mine, and I'm very proud that I have a few bits of her work in my house, up on the wall and in my kitchen cupboards and on the kitchen shelves. Suffice to say, I'm a big fan. Lucia, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you for inviting me on.
I got stumped when I was saying ceramist. I wanted to say ceramicist.
That is what you should have said.
That is what...
Ceramicist, yeah.
What were you thinking?
You could have just gone with potter. Would have been easier.
Potter.
Yeah.
Artist and potter.
That's okay.
Okay, well, I'm not going to re-record that because...
It's quite funny.
You probably thought, what is... Yeah. I looked it up.
I mean, yeah, it is quite a funny word to say if you look at the spelling. It is quite a hard word to say. Don't worry about it.
Well, I prefer ceramicist to ceramist. Yeah. It's helpful if you can say what you do.
Yeah, it does help.
So, Lucia, we're going to get on to talking about the colour wheel in this episode, which is why we thought it'd be great to speak with you, someone who conscientiously works with colour every day. I mean, we should probably say now that whilst listening to this podcast, you can get a very good idea of Lucia's work by visiting her website, luciafraser.com, which I'm sure will help bring to life some of the stuff that we're talking about. And I could have just read out the about section of your website, Lucia, to describe your work. But seeing as you're here, do you want to tell us the kind of art and the kind of ceramics that you create? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So I'm kind of mainly using landscape as a starting point, and then I will take that, and then my paintings and ceramics, I'd say, end up evolving to be quite abstract in their nature. But the starting point is having been somewhere that inspires me to want to paint, and that really comes from, I guess, color and light. Really, I'd say light is probably the thing that really makes me want to pick up a paintbrush, because it's kind of, I need, especially, I think when I'm making the work, I need the right circumstances, which involve lots of light. I'm quite interested to chat to you guys about this, actually, with color in mind, because obviously light it provides color, right? So, I mean, I can't really paint. For example, I had a studio recently that I've moved out of, thank goodness, because I just could not paint in there. The light was terrible. And I was sort of kind of wondering, what is it? I've got this block, and I need full natural light to paint, which is interesting. Yeah.
I was going to ask about that. So you're talking about light and talking about lots of light, but I was going to ask whether it's natural light or whether artificial light.
And actually, it really helps if it's kind of coming in through, say, a roof light. So it's kind of coming down from, it's very, I think it's when I'm working on a canvas, I always work on the wall, and it really affects how I paint. It really does. It's so interesting.
So without that light, you do feel a kind of blockage. You don't feel that creativity is flowing as much for you. That you want to do.
I had a light prism, and I was kind of finding that really interesting, and because the palette I work with tends to be the cooler colors, so sort of purples, blues, and greens, and pinks. And so I tend to avoid primary colors. I tend to avoid more bold kind of. I think that we'll go on to that, but yeah, it's just all very interesting to me. I wish I was a bit more knowledgeable about why I choose the colors I choose, but it is just very instinctive.
Well, do you know what? Often I find I wonder stuff, and then on the podcast we talk about it, and it turns out, okay, I could maybe understand that a bit more. Who knows? By the end of this podcast,
you might help me produce a new collection.
That little grey. Wow, that would be amazing. The Sketchplanations collection.
Yeah.
Okay, the colour wheel. Jono, let's go to you. Can you describe what the colour wheel is, and maybe tell us why you wanted to create this sketch?
Yeah, as you say, this is the basic colour wheel. This is one of the most sort of simple models of colour I remember learning a long time ago. For me, I really like the structure of it, because I think it's quite, I don't know, I think it's quite interesting. In some ways, colour can just be like, pick what you like. But the colour wheel is interesting for me because it gives this order. And then there was also, as I learned from art teachers, like a bit of logic to where you might use this or that, a bit of science behind what you were picking. And you can use your intuition, but you can also inform it and help elevate it using some knowledge. And so the colour wheel is focused on the three colours, the primary colours, the red, yellow, and the blue. And what's nice is if you put those around a circle, in between the red and the yellow, you get the secondary colour of orange, and in between the red and the blue, you get the secondary colour of purple, and so on with green at the bottom. And so you end up with like here's a little triangle of my primaries, here's a little triangle of my secondaries. And then you also end up, because you've got a circle, that these things you have opposites, which are the complementary colours. And so this is where you have colours which are sort of opposite ends of colours. They're complementary because they're really distinctive. And I remember my art teacher sort of saying, like, if you got something that's quite yellow and you want to have a real nice contrast with it, we'll try using purple instead, because that's at the opposite end of the colour wheel. It's the complementary colour for it, for example. And so for me, I don't know, before the colour wheel, colours are just colours. I just pick this or that because I like it or I don't. And so it just gave a bit of structure to what was otherwise very unordered in my mind, and I quite liked it. And sometimes going, okay, can I use a complementary colour here to create a bit of contrast, for example? But that's what it is. That's why I did it.
And do you use it with Sketchplanations sometimes? Do you kind of just check in with the colour wheel?
Not specifically, but I do have a palette that I drew from actually, and I also got some feedback on it from a designer who helped me create the set of colours. And I work with, generally speaking, a really limited palette, which I quite like in the sketches. It sort of limits me.
Yeah.
But you do want things to be able to stand out and draw attention to this or draw attention to that, and making sure I've got in my palette colours from different parts of the colour wheel is really helpful.
And let me just check this. Is the idea that within that structure of the primary colours, and then you mix primaries to get secondaries, you can keep going in that, and basically you can mix any combination of your primary colours to get any other colour? Is that the theory?
I mean, that's the idea with primary colours, that, you mix them together and you get all of the other colours, to my knowledge. I mean, you can add, and this is why it's the basic colour wheel, but we haven't talked about like saturation, for example, and obviously you can add white, and you can have lighter colours of these and darker colours of these, and so if you put all these together, yes, I think in principle you get every colour.
Brilliant. Lucia, back to you. Are you conscious of the colour wheel and the relationship, the kind of scientific relationship, the structured relationship between these certain colours in your work?
Well, not really. To be honest, like I say, it's very instinctive how I use colour, but I was interested to look at the colour wheel and see that my palette is strictly on one half of that wheel. So I'm kind of blending red and blue to make like various tones of purple and pink, and I mean, I guess adding white there as well, but I sort of stick very sort of within that side of it. I was thinking about it and how you respond to colour. I mean, for me, red is such an angry colour. Because it's used very much for like warning, stop, kind of like alert. And that for me, I don't want to communicate that at all with what I'm making. So I guess maybe that's why am I consciously doing that? I don't know. Or is it just something that I'm naturally drawn to? I don't know. Jono, do you have colours? What colours do you find that you're drawn to?
Yeah, I don't know. I usually think about it as, and this is because I'm drawing and I'm sketching all the time, is I've got essentially a fairly plain view that I'm working with, and then I want to be able to pick out and lift certain areas with brighter colours, and my palette started from my pens that I had, right? So I had a really nice red and a really nice green, and I've got a decent blue, but the blue doesn't contrast as much with the black, so I'm more likely to use the other ones. But that's because I'm coming from a pen. I don't have like a beautiful.
You're not mixing,
palette. Yeah, I mean, I guess I could, but that's sort of where the aesthetic comes from, I suppose. Yeah.
And Tommy, I was looking at the colouring involved in your branding. Because on your website, what I picked out was there's a bit of pink, there's a bit of peach, and a bit of and black.
Yeah. So is
that correct?
In our branding, it's gradually changed over time. It started as quite black and white in a kind of Chanel kind of trying to be quite classy, and then we found that was quite harsh, and so we've moved through a number of different pinks, and recently a lot of our electronic products have rose gold, which has been an incredibly popular color in the last few years, and going more towards a kind of pinky version of that to give softness. But the majority of my products are, the aesthetics is already done by my designer. I don't get much involved with color. I actually, in some respects, find color quite daunting, very tricky, frankly. I have my trusty 4-color pen, which is the color of a lot of my work, my personal work, on my sort of sketches, which is your basic red, green, blue, black. Interestingly, I've started using a remote one of these sort of e-inks pads, which I really, really like, except it can only do black and white or grey and white. And I actually find I'm struggling a little bit with thought in the fact that I can't have any other colours other than grey and white, which I feel a little bit like I've started to go back to paper and pens. Coming back to the colour wheel, what I didn't realise was some of the complementary ones here. Like, I don't know if you guys remember the sort of iconic Golf, the Ford GT40, which was the Le Mans car, which was in that blue and orange. It's an incredibly beautiful sports car, and I always thought that was a really random combination, and no doubt it's because it's on that complementary colour opposite.
Interesting you should mention that, Tommy. So I went through a whole load of brands earlier and looked at the different colour choices they've used, and there are a lot that have chosen the complementary colours. Orange and blue for me is Luton Town.
Yeah,
But
of course.
interestingly, Fanta. And then, but also the complementary red and green. You've got Heineken. There's also Stop and Go. You know, just like traffic lights, stop and go, red and green. And then yellow and purple, I think you mentioned that earlier, Jono. You've got the LA Lakers, you've got Taco Bell, Thai Airlines, FedEx, it's a bit more purple and orange, but all that kind of stuff. But then you do get quite a few brands who use two primary colours. Bang, bang. And the red and yellow, Lucia, you mentioned red and yellow together earlier about colours that you tend to stay away from. Those brands for me are really memorable. It's like McDonald's, Burger King, Kodak, Shell, Red Bull, DHL. You see it, it's just bang, right in your face. And then if I think of
probably not what you're going for with your artwork, I guess.
No, but
bang, right in your face.
But then
Bang
yellow and blue, the combination of yellow and blue primary colours, things like IKEA and Corona, they're not as, when you see them, they don't have the same effect as the red and yellow brands. I didn't think in terms of just what that did to me. It's coming back to what you were talking about, red, I think, Lucia, being that colour that does, for a lot of people anyway, it means, or it represents anger and I don't know, kind of I don't know, what is it, what else would you say?
Danger. It's
danger,
sort of blood,
Yeah.
isn't it? It's
all those.
But I have to say, like, I think brands are interesting, right? So brands are different from art because they have, like, the brand colours have to serve all sorts of other functions as well. Rob, you and I don't know if you remember, we were chatting about Decathlon recently changing their brand colour, and they just basically went to a slightly darker blue as far as we could tell.
Yeah.
And they're often, you're also looking for like contrast, for example, like how does this stand out, and can I write with white text on this? Can I write with black text on this base color? That kind of thing. So I think brands are often doing other things. And one of the examples I was going to think of when I thought about color was when I was at the start of Nutmeg, and we were trying to develop a brand from scratch for this company, and me and the designer put together a bunch of versions of the website and the logo in lots of different colors. And it's very clear that, like, colors are very cultural as well, because I think we probably have that association with red, but red can also mean like lucky in other parts of the world, right? And it can mean so very different things depending on where you grew up and how you see it as you're growing up. And so we did a bunch of like versions of this logo and the website, and we were trying to decide which one it was. And somebody was like, yeah, red is definitely the color of innovation in this industry. And then blue is supposed to be very trustworthy. So if you're a bank, maybe that's a great one because you want people to trust you with your money. So, you know, we're calm and we're on top of this. And then I put it out to a poll and it came back green, and that's why Nutmeg's green. But I just think that everybody brings different opinions to this and different, like their own feelings from when they grow up, and it's very cultural.
It is subjective, isn't it? Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about the media that you enjoy using, because I know I have a lovely, great canvas on the wall next door, which is my pride. So, can you tell us a bit about the media that you often use with, especially with your painting?
Yeah, so painting, I work with inks and they're water-based. So I mix up powdered ink. It sounds a bit strange, but I layer the canvases with the ink, and then I'll use household bleach to strip the colour out, which then leaves behind a kind of almost like an ethereal, I mean, your painting, Rob, has this going on in it quite a lot. The kind of, I pour the ink down the canvas, and then I will put the bleach on in the same way, but it will strip certain areas of colour out, but leave behind just very echoey sort of like marks that it just happens to be what I'm trying to sort of say about the landscape. So I fell on it as a technique, and I've just stuck with it. So it's quite unusual, but it works. It works for me.
It's gorgeous. There is a kind of mysterious element to it.
Yeah.
I find myself getting lost in it sometimes.
And I think it depends on the time of day that you're looking at the paintings.
And the light, I guess.
As to how the light, basically. The light changes how you see them. which I like. So they're kind of evolving throughout the day. Yeah.
How did you happen upon the bleaching idea?
Well, actually, yeah, I say I happened upon it. My A-level art teacher showed us how to do it.
Yeah.
I think you just get lucky sometimes with who teaches you. And she taught me about bleach, and then I loved it so much. I think we were at that point we were drawing with it with a stick. So you kind of put your base layer down, and then you'd sketch with the bleach. So I mean, honestly, everyone should try it. It's really fun.
Nice.
I was going to say this. Actually, I distinctly remember being like, wow, this is brilliant. Doing art A-level and doing everything in reverse. So it was like you painted the whole paper first with ink and then drew with the bleach. And it was so I don't know. I remember for me, it was really interesting because I'd always done like pen and pencil stuff. And that's just always like, it's a white surface and you're drawing the dark. And then when I was drawing with bleach, it's the opposite. I'm like going, right, what's light here in this picture and how can I lift that out? And it was really, really a fun experience. And it makes a beautiful, beautiful effect.
Really, really good, isn't it? Yeah, I feel it a lot more freeing because I feel like there's less to lose. You're kind of taking away rather than putting down. So if you're feeling nervous about drawing or painting, putting down a mark with a dark colour is quite overwhelming sometimes. So I like the removal rather than the application. That makes sense.
Nice.
It's like a sculptor where you take
if you're kind of taking away. Yeah.
And woodwork's the same. You're taking away. Oh, I've not thought about that like that. That's good. That's good.
Neither have I.
Lucia, one of the coolest things that I know you did was your residency in Iceland.
Yeah, that was amazing. Yeah, I think that really changed how I paint in terms of with the bleach as well. It just because I was there in midsummer, so we had 24-hour light, and when it was obviously the light was just a huge part of my time there. I just couldn't get over it. I was out there at midnight, like pacing around, just marveling at how light it was.
But and the landscape and the seascapes are pretty awesome.
I mean, and I think,
well, right?
Of course, yeah. I mean, it's breathtaking. But I think what happens is the quality of light changes the color of everything there. Everything's so much more vivid, and they have this. I think it's an invasive species, but it's the lupine. It's a blue flower, but it's kind of gone everywhere. Probably isn't that good for the ecosystem, but it's beautiful. It's like this, so it adds this extra tint. You know, when you go to the woodland, and at the moment, actually, we'll just pass it with bluebell season, and you see these sort of carpets of blue, and it really affects how you're viewing the landscape because you're kind of getting this almost like this sort of strip of blue in your vision. And it's the same in Iceland. When I went, it was like that. So you had the blue sky, the blue sea, all these different types of blue, and then the blue lupines. I hope I'm saying that right. It could be lupine. I don't know. We'll see. No, anyone?
We'll see. Anyone?
I go for
belly moan. Yeah, I'd say lupine. Because you talked about the fact that you prefer being in the cooler range of tones, colours.
Yeah, I mean, I'm adverse to any of the warmer. I just can't paint with red or bright yellow or bright orange. I can't really touch those colours. They almost give me some kind of EBGBs. I don't know what it is.
It's cool, isn't it? Yeah. I wonder why that is, because I've kind of known that about your work. The furthest I've seen it go is probably in some of the ceramics that you've done, where you've pushed the pinks a little further, maybe.
But just like a splash, not like a full on. It's like a very pale pink.
Yes.
But I think I'm trying to evoke a sense of kind of calm and escapism. I don't want them to be my paintings or ceramics to be sort of like punching you in the face with color. I want them to be soothing, and that's why I make art, because I'm trying to soothe myself. So that's the effect I want them to have when they go out in the world. I hope that's how you feel about your painting. It's kind of calming.
It certainly is.
Yeah. So I think color's a massive part of that. If I did those paintings in monochrome or bright red and yellow, they just wouldn't work.
Where it'd be a very different vibe you'd get from passing it or standing in front of it and looking at it.
It would be communicating something entirely different,
Yeah. It's like you're going to go out and start a fight or something.
We had, not long ago, we spoke with Frank Cinelli with music, and he was talking a similar way about what he tried to do with the music to get across a feeling with it. And it's interesting to think how yours, you might have music that's soothing, but a painting that's soothing.
I have to listen to really soothing music while I paint as well. Yeah. So I have to be in a certain mood. I can't paint if I'm stressed or thinking about something else too much. I have to get into the zone, and then that's when they happen. Like I say, in the environment as well, it really matters. So it's all about that kind of flow state that you can get into.
Lucia, I'd love to know your thoughts on colour with ceramics, because I did quite a lot of ceramics at school. And one of the things I find so frustrating is you didn't really know what the colour would be afterwards.
Good question,
because it changes so much. So I wonder how that works for you.
Yeah.
Do you mean it changes once you've fired it in the kiln?
Yeah, and it can change a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you can't, when you glaze a piece, you can't look at that colour of the unfired glaze and no, really, that's just no representation at all of what it's going to look like. So you have to do a lot. Well, what I do is I just test all my glazes and then look at them, how they interact with glazes on top of each other. I have to just do hundreds of tests, and then eventually I'll get the sweet spot, and then it does become a lot more scientific. So it's quite laborious, but then when you do find those two glazes that overlap and create that sweet spot, then it's brilliant. But it isn't like painting. You don't really know. You're just going in blind, really, into the kiln. The pieces But then
when you bring those test pieces out, is it sometimes like a really big surprise as to what's happened? Like,
yeah, it's really fun actually. That it's kind of magic. It's sort of you can get some really amazing results, but like I say, you don't really know what you're going to get until because they can. I think if you layer one glaze on top of another, but then reverse that order, then you'll get a completely different mid color, if that makes sense, where they've overlapped.
Yeah.
So depending on which order they've gone on top of each other in the kiln, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Wow.
It's really good to embrace it, because I can imagine that being extremely frustrating at the same time as being like, wow, this is magical. Magical's a much better way to think about it.
Yeah. Also, the some glazes, depending on how thick they are in the pot when you're mixing, if they need water to be a certain consistency, they have single cream is the consistency you're looking for. If you don't get it quite right, then the colour might come out completely different. So I have done dinner set orders, for example, because I make plates for eating off as well. And I've had a whole set sent back to me because the lady said the pink wasn't quite the right pink that she had of an original plate of mine. So that can be really frustrating, because obviously someone's version of this is the other thing I find interesting about colour is we don't really know how we're all seeing colour individually. Her version of the pink that she wanted, I thought I'd kind of hit it, but I hadn't, because obviously she had a certain sensitivity towards pink. She really wanted it to be a certain type of deep pink, and I didn't get it right,
But then I'm assuming that is obviously kind of a tone and colours that she's really sensitive to. That she responds. She obviously responds very sensitively to. Yeah. To be able to pick that up where you hadn't necessarily picked that up.
No, well, I thought it was okay, but no, it wasn't right for her. So how we're seeing colour is subjective.
I was going to say I struggle with certain boundaries between greens and blues and teals and turquoises and sometimes something that's blatantly green to someone, like a flip flop or something. I said, well, that's blue. I said, no, that is definitely green.
Really?
And I do struggle in that area. And I say struggle, maybe the only area I struggle in is trying to communicate what that is. And to many people, I'm getting it wrong, in inverted commas. Yeah. But that's how I see it and that's how I interpret it, right? So I guess to your point that it is a very individual thing.
We definitely have that here with me and my wife. From time to time, she'll be like, "Can you put my blue trainers in?" And I'm like,
yeah.
"Oh, she's got these grey ones. Does she mean these grey ones?" Or and there's other.
Yeah.
There's definitely a red jacket that I think is orange.
Right.
She always thinks it's red, but there's like two jackets which are quite similar. So, yeah. Causes some friction at times. I said, "Why have you put this one in?" Well, that's what you asked for. It's green.
Yeah.
No, it's grey.
My dad is actually colourblind, so he sees particularly he mixes red and green, so he sees red as green and vice versa, and that's how it was discovered at school, because he was asked to paint a flower and he painted the petals green and the stem red. So interesting that those two colours that's where you fall down as a colourblind person.
Yeah, it was interesting, Rob, when you mentioned about the red and green, because there's that
red and green should never be seen.
Yeah, very trite. Red and green
seen.
should never be seen. So I do think about that if I'm doing my sketches, for example, that if I want two things to be differentiated, because they're different types of things on the sketch, I shouldn't use red and green to do that, because somebody will see them as the same and they won't get that at all.
Wow.
But it still sort of boggles my mind that traffic lights are like red and green, like the one most important place to actually make sure that people really know what's going on. At least there's a top and a bottom. I guess that's what you do, right?
And they could never merge it together, because you could easily make one light that would do all three colours, but they could never do that. It has to be top, middle, bottom.
So is that the most common difficulty in colour blindness then? Red and green, mixing those up? Yeah.
I believe
so. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
It's a good point, Tom. I didn't thought about that with a single traffic light, because it's the only way it's differentiated is the colour. You just can't have that, which is why having three lights on top of each other gives you a position. Yeah. So you just use white lights and just have three lights, for example, and that would be just as good for if you were colourblind.
Apart from in the distance, you see a white light at the top. Is that in the top? Is that in the middle? Is that at the bottom? I think the system we've got turns out pretty good. Somebody's thought about it.
It seems to work.
What about blue? Could have a blue. Blue, go.
The other thing I was going to talk about, because one of the things in nature that always makes me stop in my tracks and look, is like an awesome sunset. And I was down at the coast this weekend, where you just get better sunsets because you can see further. Your landscape or your seascape is much deeper and much wider. And those, I'm going to say hues, is that the right word? And tones that come out.
I like colours. Colours was good.
I'll stick with colours. I've got tints, shades, tones in front of me here on my notes.
Subtle, isn't it?
Those colours, I just find that they're absolutely magnificent. And sometimes they're really rich, but other times they are very faded. And is that something that you also play with consciously in your art, Lucia, about in some areas or in some places having quite deep colours, but then others having it more faded, and maybe even a contrast between the two on the same piece?
Yeah, it is a lot about contrast. You do, for me anyway, I don't want to paint a sort of an entirely muted piece, because I'm trying to sort of depict something a bit more, it's more suggestive. I do work a lot with horizon lines, that they kind of blur into each other, but there is always a starting point, like I say, which is one brush stroke with a dark colour, and then that will always remain as a kind of focus. I think I was
going to say on my piece, that's I know exactly where that is.
Yeah. There's always there's always a horizon line somewhere.
I'll include a link to my piece of Lucia Fraser's art that I have. I'll include a link to that in the podcast description so people can see that. But yes, there is a distinct. No, it is distinct in a way, but you're not looking for it.
It's not obvious. I think it's just sort of there. It's a presence, isn't it? It's like I'm not trying to sort of say, look, this is the point where the sky meets the sea. It's just it's a suggestion. So it's kind of, and it might move as well, like, because there's been many layers. So depending on the
light again.
Yeah.
Can you actually remember it?
Yeah. You're painting.
Yeah. Wow.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
I remember the good ones.
Lucia, I was looking, last weekend, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, we had this, was it the weekend before, ridiculous Northern Lights.
The Northern Lights.
And I was also thinking, I knew we were speaking coming up, and I was thinking that it reminded me these beautiful photos of the Northern Lights, of the sort of colours and the effect and the way it made me feel when I saw a lot of your paintings. And I know they're slightly different palettes, but
no, that's really nice to hear. Yeah, thank you for saying that. I actually have never seen the Northern Lights, but it's weird that I can say I'm inspired by them if I haven't actually seen them, but they are. I mean, I was just flat out asleep that night, and I'm so upset because people were posting photos of the Northern Lights above my head in my village the next day.
Oh, you're kidding?
No, I know. So I really missed out there. But I have to go back to Iceland for that, I think. It's a good excuse.
Fair enough.
I needed somebody to literally just drive around the streets like an ice cream van and wake everybody up. Hey guys,
I know,
it's once in a lifetime chance outside your window right now.
Gutted.
I'd have been thrilled.
Jono has a great story about that night.
Well, we went out for the next night because there was a chance that you might see the Northern Lights the next night. And so at 8:00 we were like, oh, you know what? It's cheaper than going to Iceland. Let's all get in the car, and we drove up to a Downs and slept in the car till 3 a.m. And
no,
with the kids.
Yeah, with the kids.
He drove quite a long way. He drove up to near me.
You really tried. Yeah. Did you not see them?
And they didn't know. There were none. They were all. I kept searching, for are there going to be any light? All I could see was people posting beautiful photos of the previous night. What? I was just fast asleep. Nobody told me. But it was worth a try.
Did you say there were hundreds of people in the car park when you arrived?
Yeah. We were not the only people who had the idea of going and park in a dark field to see the Northern Lights. That's for sure.
So another thing in nature where you do get this effect on colour, and Jono, I know you've got a sketch on this. I've beaten you to it. Is atmospheric perspective. Right? Do you want to explain that, Jono, briefly?
I can do. Atmospheric perspective was something, I'd witnessed so many times, but I'd never thought about the logic of it, and I never knew what the name was. And so particularly...
So an example of atmospheric perspective.
Yeah, it is the classic example for me is standing on a mountain ridge on a slightly hazy day, looking into the distance. And if there's lots of ridges, the ones in the distance sort of fade out and essentially become the colour of the sky. Whereas the things closer to you, the ridges closer to you, are much more vibrant and deep in colour. They actually have colour. And at the end, you've basically got sky. And so atmospheric perspective is the sort of interference in light between you and the distance, and you see that the colours become more muted as you go into the distance. And it's a beautiful effect as well. Also reminiscent of Lucia's painting.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Oh, thanks again.
It's true.
It.
I said at the top, Lucia, we're fans.
That's actually a site that really does make me want to paint. I mean, it's almost kind of annoying because it looks better than my paintings will ever look. And I just kind of want to...
Bloody nature.
Maybe sometimes I should just go into photography. This is too good.
This is one nature made earlier.
Yeah. Like, what am I trying to do here? It's just there. It's just... Yeah.
Can I ask you a question about an observation I have with colour and generations? So my wife Lucia is a big fan of your kind of colours, blues and greys and muted tones. And I always have a joke when we're sort of thinking about redecorating a room. I'm like, okay, so which version of blue grey are we having in this room? This sort of thing, and maybe a touch of pink here, and I don't know if it is as a result, but my kids love bright colours. So all their clothes are like fluorescent yellow, fluorescent green. They love a football top, which is a really bright, vibrant colour as well. And I kind of think back to generations before us where avocado baths were a thing. Like people would genuinely choose that, and nowadays all our bars and all our stuff are white or silver. And I wonder, is it like a rebellion thing about our parents that that my kids want really bright colours because they live in this very natural world, or that? So I suppose, did your palette come from that? Are your parents very bright colours? Do you have an avocado bath, for example, and do you think this is a cycle of that
maybe
happens?
Although I was just thinking, I think it's a lot to do with, in terms of interiors, it's a lot to do with trends. I think with children it's more about, children are much more they feel more free, they feel more bold, they want to play, and those colours suggest all those things. And orange and yellow are very sort of like, bright, cheery. That's how children tend to sort of, their natural disposition is that.
Yeah.
Whereas I think I don't know how I can't really remember what my favourite colours were when I was younger, but as I've matured in with my art as well, like I've sort of, what I'm trying to do is create something that's soothing and more like soft and gentle, and I guess that's where I'm going with my colour choice.
But you I'll make a statement and then I'll ask you if you feel it's true or not. But you don't feel that you're affected by trends in your artwork?
No, not at all. Yeah, I mean, I remember being at doing my art degree, and I was asked, why are you using blue and purple, like pale blues and purples and pinks all the time? Why are you doing that? And I just said, because they just speak to me. I thought, they're the colours I want to use. Do I have to explain myself? They really wanted me to explain it, and I actually couldn't. And I wish I could in a way, but it's just an instinct.
I think that is fair. There's so many things that I do, or that I have preferences one way or another. I can't tell you
can't
why.
explain. Yeah.
No, it's just how it is.
Keep those to yourself, maybe.
That started going a bit weird then. Is there anything anyone else would like to add on our chat about colour and the colour wheel before we round off?
When I was at Nutmeg, the founder was a brilliant guy. He had a friend who was an artist, and instead of like the traditional thing of putting your photo on the website of like, here's the team, he got his friend to come in and paint little portraits of everybody. And his friend was amazing at just sitting there 20 minutes, paint your portrait. And I had an interesting chat with him while I was trying to sit still for it, because I've always drawn with like pens and pencils, and so I typically think of things in lines, and he was painting with color and blobs of color, and so looking for areas of color. And it was just, I remember finding it quite striking. It was such a different way of approaching things to me. And he said it's quite interesting, like if you're drawing a face, you can draw like the outline of the face and the ridge of the nose, but like, there's no line in the middle of your cheek necessarily. So and how steep does the cheekbone need to be in order to warrant a little pen line? Whereas if you're going with color, you just go, there was no outlines in what he was painting. It was just like, you just look for the color and I just put it there. And I remember thinking, oh, that's lovely. I wish I was doing that. And why am I've got a pen and it's easy to do stuff with it, but I'm like conjuring these lines out of nowhere, and they don't exist. Like there isn't a line there. I've just made it up and put it there. Whereas there isn't that in the paintings, the work that I've seen of yours, which is a really different approach.
Yeah, I don't really like lines.
You used to do pet portraits, didn't you, Lucia?
Yeah, I did.
And that's like a similar thing there, where you just have to find the colour, right? I mean, I saw them. They're brilliant. They're great.
Oh, yeah. I mean, thank you. I did leave that behind as a career choice, but
yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, but
we don't have to bring it up if you don't want to.
Cheers, Rob.
Tell me all about it.
I could make good money doing that, but no, it's more about I was just using charcoal and shading a lot. So yeah, that was how I was doing that. But actually, I don't like the process. It's sort of too prescribed. You have to sort of get it really right.
Yes, whereas yours, as you said at the very beginning, it's about your interpretation and your memory of an
Yeah,
environment and of an emotion.
the feeling and a mood.
Yeah.
It's almost like the presence of something is more important than the actual depiction of it, and that's what I'm trying to sort of paint, if that makes sense. So like the presence of the sea and how you feel when you're there, and the presence of a mountain, looming over you. That's kind of what I'm trying to get across. I'm not trying to like sort of paint the actual lines of the ridges, although again, like you said earlier about the perspective, what was it called?
Atmospheric perspective.
Atmospheric perspective. I mean, I have seen paintings that do really like exactly depict that, and they are amazing. But for me, I'm just sort of, I'd rather look at it in person and then have a painting that's kind of my version of how I feel when I'm there. If that makes sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Lucia, do you have anything coming up that you'd like to plug at all? Anything we should be keeping an eye out for?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually working on ceramic paintings as my next sort of collection release. That's my big project at the moment.
Ceramic paintings.
So what I'm creating,
hang on. Yeah,
it's I'm making big tiles as big as I can get them and putting them in the kiln and glazing as I using the glaze in the way I use paint a bit in terms of the mark making. But so far I've had almost 100% breakages. So if anyone knows how to fire large tiles without getting cracks, and I'm told that I need to use, I'm going to sound really unprofessional and like I don't know what I'm doing here, which is sometimes really true. I'm told that sand in the kiln will help, so that because it's such a large surface area of ceramic, it needs to move when it's firing, and they just keep cracking right down the middle. But they look great.
Tom could probably solve this for you.
Yeah. What do you think, Tom?
That's a very, very good question for someone who's much more skilled than I, but certainly it sounds like it's the heat distribution, and someone must have solved it before.
It's weird because I can make plates and they're okay. I think it's because it's thicker clay and it's needs to move more. I don't know. Yeah, I'm going to try sand next.
Oh, that's amazing, Lucia. Okay, so where's the best place to kind of keep track of that? Is it at luciafraser.com?
My website is my name, so luciafraser.com, and then if you I use Instagram to kind of regularly update people with what I'm doing.
And what's your Insta handle?
That is at Lucia Fraser.
There you go. That's where you need to go. At Lucia Fraser and luciafraser.com. And you can buy prints from your website as well, can't you? Prints of your artwork.
Yeah,
that's where you need to go. That's where you need to go. Lucia, thanks so much for coming on and talking all things colour.
Thank you again, yeah. I've really enjoyed it. It's been great talking to you guys. Thank you for having me. I've
genuinely learned loads of stuff from that discussion. I don't think we've hit the brief of answering your why.
No.
So I'm sorry about that.
Light prisms. Yeah, don't worry. I'll go elsewhere for that.
We can workshop it elsewhere. We'll workshop it elsewhere.
Yeah.
But I do feel quite inclined to go next door now into my front room and just have another good look at my Lucia Fraser artwork up on the wall. So in fact, I'm quite excited to do that. So let's round off this episode quite quickly. Until the next time we say yellow, I'll take it as red that you're all doing well and not feeling blue. If you feel inclined, please do give us a rate and a review. We'll be back in just a sec with your correspondence since last time. And remember, you can also email us on hello@sketchplanations.com. But for now, thank you for listening. Go well, stay well. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
And we're back to have a little look through this week's... And we're back to have a little look through the post bag. So the last episode we recorded was about Goldilocks tasks, and we've had an email from Simon. It's a great email. He covers loads and loads of stuff in here, and I'm surprised we didn't bring some of this up in the podcast itself. I will reveal what I mean now. So Simon says, sport is a great example of the Goldilocks zone. I was explaining it to my climbing buddy last night, and that's a really visible example. The climbs are graded and get progressively more difficult. The easiest climbs can be fun, but get a bit boring quickly, whereas the hardest climbs are just too demoralizing. The sweet spot is where a climb is challenging enough, but doable. Absolutely. I mean, bang on. Let me carry on with the email before I delve into that a little bit with you, Jono. Simon goes on to say, so many examples like this in various different sports or in learning any new skill, be it music, foreign language, DIY, which is great because we did talk about some of that. And he says, there is also something quite relaxing in the repetitive stuff too, like mowing the lawn. But if you had to do it all the time, it wouldn't be so relaxing. Great points, Simon. Thank you very much for your email. We didn't really talk loads about sport, did we?
We always talk about sport. We always talk about sport, but climbing is a really good one because it's so seemingly objective in that, like,
yes,
here's a wall, what is it? Here's a route, sorry. And and he's actually right. You have all of these levels, don't you, where it's graded really finely.
Yes.
And so you get really good track of your progress, not just up the wall, but progress through the levels. And you see somebody doing something ridiculous at first, like El Capitan or something, and you're like, oh, that's completely impossible. But you work up your ones. Yeah, it's great. I love it.
I don't know loads about the grading within climbing, but they're numbered and lettered, right? It's like 1 and then 2A, 2B, and I guess it depends on the climbing walls that you go to. So it's but it is graded in terms of its difficulty. Do you know any more about it?
I know a little bit. It's mostly the numbers, and then it gets up to you get 5 point this, 5 point that, 5 point this, and so
right.
You can be very clear that like I'm working on a 5.7, but
okay,
it's on a 5.11, or this is my only time I've ever managed a 5.10 or whatever it is.
Yes,
which I think is quite satisfying.
But in the small amount of climbing or bouldering that I've done, Simon's absolutely right. Once you've done the easy route, it doesn't provide that much of a challenge anymore. I was going to say fun. It is still kind of fun, but it's more like being in a kid's playground and going up the climbing frames. Like, yeah, I can do this, no problem. I'm not really challenging myself. I'm not that scared. I'm not working that hard. But you do find that level quite quickly. But give it maybe 3 or 4 attempts where perhaps in the first goes you don't make it across this one particular hold. They can get to a point, even within an hour or so or half an hour, where you do progress. And that, for me, great example of that Goldilocks zone.
Yeah, there's a brilliant business, I think, in the UK called Clip and Climb, with these top rope climbing things. And literally, like a 4-year-old can turn up and safely climb these walls and jump off. And they have all these fixed walls, like 16 of them, let's say, in a place. And in principle, that might just get too easy for people, but they always have they have 3 levels. And so that's another nice thing about climbing, is you can have one wall, but you can have hard ways of doing it and easy ways of doing it. Yeah. So if you want, you can go up the easy way. But if you just do the yellow holds or whatever, then it's like that much harder. If you just do the red holds, it's even harder. And so you can make any one wall as hard as you like. And I think it gives you, like, Clip and Climb gives you these 3 levels. Like, your first thing is, if you're 4, you just climb up it, and that's brilliant. But you can
doesn't
still
matter
do
what route, just go.
If you're 16 or 20 or whatever, and you're like, I'm trying the hardest one now, it's just brilliant. It keeps people in the sweet spot.
Wouldn't it be great if there were means to translate that kind of grading difficulty system into other walks of life? And other sports, perhaps, but learning any kind of skill. And I guess if you are being taught to learn any new skill, there will be that progression built into the teaching, right? So you're not just going to go in at, say judo. You're not going to go up against the black belt straight away.
Yeah, but I think there's more room for it. Like, it often strikes me with like 10-pin bowling.
Yeah,
all right, should do more of this, right? So 10-pin, if you're really just starting out, you can have like the bumpers.
Yeah,
and you can have the thing where you put the ball on and it rolls it down. You just
the shoot, yeah.
But then after that, somebody who's been playing for 20 years and gets a strike every time is having the exact same course as somebody else. I feel like you could make that much harder, couldn't you? Like, make it narrower.
Obstacles,
obstacles. Mate, you have to jump
ramps.
This, like crazy golf. Put the pins are moving. I don't know. Like, we make it more fun.
I like it. That's amazing. Business idea.
Yeah.
Crazy bowling. Anyway, thank you, Simon. We digress. Thank you very much, Simon. Jono, you had another one come in.
I just wanted to share one from Folk on LinkedIn, who I shared the Goldilocks Tasks podcast on LinkedIn, and he said, thanks very much for that. I missed the link to the podcast. Now I've seen your website, I can listen to it there. But to be honest, it was a Goldilocks Goldilocks task to find the podcast because I didn't actually help you get there. So thank you for that. It was a good example of me not actually making it easy. It's funny, isn't it? Sometimes you want stuff to be just, usually on the web, you're trying to do stuff as easy as possible.
Yeah, one click.
Yeah.
We laid a treasure map.
Follow these instructions. Eventually, you may find the podcast. I must do better.
We could all do better, Jono. We can always all do better. Thank you for that, Volk. And finally, I just wanted to share something that came in on the episode before Goldilocks Task, which was on sharpening the saw. So this was a message that was sent to me on X. It's from Darius Ski. And so sharpen the saw, just to remind you, was all about taking a break from whatever it is you're doing to refresh and recharge before going back in again, so that you can go in with a fully sharpened blade and be as effective and productive as you possibly can. And so Darius Ski posed the question to me saying, so do you think people like Isambard Kingdom Brunel paused? And there's a smiley face after it. So it's taken in goodwill. And he's absolutely right. You know, some of the world's most celebrated achievers, we should probably say, probably never did stop to sharpen the saw. We're just on it the whole time. But I didn't know, but I did have to look up exactly the right figure for this. But Isambard Kingdom Brunel died at the age of 53. And I know times were different back then in Victorian times, but men, and particularly relatively affluent men, were living till longer than 53. So perhaps had Isambard stopped to sharpen the saw,
recharged a bit more. Yeah. Might still be with us. Maybe not. I don't know. I think it's quite difficult to know that. Like if you're, there are people who are extremely driven in life and seem to get enormous amounts done. But on the other hand, maybe they do recharge still, or maybe they don't. I don't know. See Elon Musk. Recharge.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
Djokovic.
Exactly. And if they stop, they're like it's like sharks. If they stop, they die. Is that right?
Is that what happens to sharks if they stop? I don't know.
They stop swimming. Yeah, who knows? But yes, it's just quite a wry, witty remark from Darius. Thank you very much for that. Listen, that's enough for the postbag this week. Thank you all for your messages. Please do keep sending them in whichever manner is best for you, on social media, via the website, via email. They're all viable, so keep them coming in. Thanks very much. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Cheers, everyone.
All music on this podcast is sourced from the very talented Frank Cinelli, and you can find loads more tracks at frankcinelli.com.